if we think of, the language that they communicate with as meaningful coincidences, more in the realm of the subconscious, then we have to do certain things to allow for those things to come up. So like being aware of our dreams, being conscious of hypnagogia, writing to your loved one as if they're still, here, include them as if they're just in Europe and write to them and tell them about your day and how it went and invite them to experience these things with you. And you'd be surprised how when you do that, the universe does sometimes respond.
Have you ever had a dream that felt too real to shake off? Or maybe, like me, you've experienced visitors during the night, something I always thought were night terrors since I was about 13 years old. But the older I get, the more I wonder, could it be something else? Could those dreams, those moments, be messages from the other side? Mediumship is a practice with deep roots, stretching back centuries to times when people relied on mediums to connect them with spirits. From Victorian-era seances to ancient oracles, mediums have always played a vital role in bridging the living and the dead. And today, in the 21st century, mediumship is more alive than ever, largely thanks to someone who's become a massive figure in the world, Tyler Henry. If you haven't heard of Tyler Henry by now, let me fill you in. He's one of the most famous mediums in the world today. His incredible gift has led him to perform readings for Hollywood's biggest names, from Billy Porter to Nikki Glaser, helping them connect with loved ones they've lost. He's the go-to guy for anyone seeking answers beyond this life. His new Netflix show, Live from the Other Side, is now streaming, and it takes his talent to a whole new level, offering live, emotional readings that bring closure and healing in ways that'll leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about life, death, and what lies beyond. For centuries, mediums have been seen as spiritual guides, often gathering people for seances or passing along messages from departed loved ones. What Tyler does, though, is more than just communication. It's a healing process. He brings closure in the most unexpected and profound ways, and he does it live, in front of an audience. So what does it mean to be a medium in today's world? How does Tyler channel these powerful connections? And does he ever find it a little spooky? With Halloween just around the corner, we'll be exploring all of that today. So, if you're curious about life after death, or if you've had your own experiences that have made you wonder, stay tuned. You won't want to miss this conversation.
I'm Tyler Henry, and this is Pride.
I want to dive right into this, but first, do you have a bird? I think I saw a bird on your Instagram, and I have a bird, and I've been doing interviews all day, and she's been insane. And then I saw your bird.
They interject. I swear, mine sings songs right when I start. It's like the equivalent of a neighbor starting a leaf blower every time I get an interview. I have a conure. What is yours?
So I have an African gray.
Oh, beautiful.
She's like right here off camera. Sometimes I actually did an interview with her flying around. But today I was doing interviews and she was talking, and you're like, okay, I'm going to lose it. But then I saw your bird and I was like, oh, Tyler, you can hear. Tyler's going to get this.
Yes, no, absolutely. It's like a rainforest here.
Absolutely. So first, I really want to talk about your new show, because actually it was my first introduction to you in like a television format, I guess you'd say. Obviously, I knew who you were, but I really loved this live element with people that I know, right? Like Billy Porter or Nikki Glaser. Tell me a little bit about how this element of these live readings, not private, with, very well-known people, how that has like changed the process for you.
Absolutely. I think we're at a time in history where technology allows us to stream and live stream in a way that we weren't able to before. And so with that advancement, it's kind of timely in the sense that we're all very much used to, since 2020, connecting virtually at a distance. So with those kind of factors in mind, I think the show was very timely, and it was important for me to demonstrate the process even more than necessarily the validations. If you want to see a highlight reel of every validation, I have two other shows, that kind of encapsulate the power of that. But my goal in doing this show was to show the rough edges, to show the process, to demonstrate that while being a medium might be a bit of a unique role, the modalities in which I receive information are accessible to everybody. And that is a subjective process, one that I wanted to really highlight through this new show.
Do you mind for our listeners kind of taking us through what that process actually is? Because I think people have preconceived notions about mediumship, and maybe that's based on, like Madame Leota from the Haunted Mansion is like something I think you would think about in pop culture, right? But that's not it really, right? Obviously, it's evolved over time from seances and things like that. But could you talk a little bit about what the process is like now?
Sure. A lot of people think of it like Oda Mae Brown from Ghost, where
Yes.
there's just constant people shuffling in. And if it were that simplistic, it would be very easy to explain. But the reality is, like anything that's kind of ambiguous, people want a very clear, simplistic answer. And when we don't have one, people get frustrated. And so I think by nature, there's a lot of misconceptions with this work. For me, and I can really only speak to my process exactly, because no doubt there's lots of modalities of spiritualism. In my process, I really just get into an altered state of consciousness in which I'm hyper aware of anything that I notice in my mind, and body. And I have to kind of relay that information in a way that is affable, that can make sense, and hope that it has some validity to the person I'm sharing it with. But it relies heavily on the idea that meaningful coincidences happen, and that if you create a sacred space for these experiences and these moments, sometimes things come through that are uncanny, that are unexplainable, and that to me reflect that we're a lot more connected to each other than we fully realize.
Now, the series really features on the readings and connections of really well known people, like I mentioned, Billy Porter and Ricki Lake. What has been the most rewarding aspect of guiding them through these deeply personal connections? Because they're very public people, right? In that way, even though they may be private, they are public figures.
And that's kind of why I wanted to do the show as well and still involve a celebrity component, because I think that there are a lot of necessary conversations to be had around the universality of grief. The fact that public figure, private citizen doesn't matter. Everybody is going to experience loss. And, in many ways, by having people on television, we let them into our homes. We, in essence, kind of develop parasocial relationships over seasons, over years of them and tuning into them at night. And so I find that there's something really valuable to be able to connect to people who are very public, really relay a private element. In talking to Ricki Lake and being able to connect with that very strong image of a treehouse dedicated to marijuana, stuff like that is so bizarre and off the wall, but so specific and so uncanny. And sometimes it all only takes one moment like that to come through in a reading to substantiate to the person that there's something going on beyond what, meets the eye.
And there's something to me in those moments, like you said, they're kind of unexplainable, remarkable moments, but also there's this sense of spookiness when something like that does come through. And with Halloween around the corner, I think people think a lot of mediumship during this time. Have there been moments, or does the work ever make you like ever give you, it's not the ick is not the right word, it's like the eerie feelings?
Feelings, it does. And I do a lot of private paranormal experiments in my own life to really try to push this ability to its limits. And I've had some very intense experiences, of which I hope to speak on over future years. But generally, readings don't frighten me. I find that I have a very specific process, and it's really just kind of getting into an active daydream and just relaying what I see. It's really not as dramatic as I think a lot of people think, at least nowadays. In the earlier years, when I didn't know how to really interpret information, it would kind of build up. It would make me sick. I would have more physical, kind of tangible impressions. And now that I've kind of gotten to a flow, you got to clear the pipes. Information just kind of, pops in a little bit more mentally, and then I can relay that accordingly.
Now, I feel like your readings are special in the way that it is not so much about this connection and the reading as it is about this. There's very deep emotions, and there's also a healing process that kind of happens in real time. And that feels special in terms of like other mediums who are also very well known. That element is a little different. How do you balance the emotional weight of these experiences, especially when you're guiding someone through something profound and trying to help them find closure?
Absolutely. I think in life, generally, this work has taught me the importance of meeting people where they're at and creating a space for them and letting it just be what it is. And I think so often when it comes to grief, people feel the need to have the right words to make it all better because people are generally uncomfortable with grieving people. But I've learned, if anything, there's great beauty in just meeting people where they're at, creating a space to talk. These readings, I think, act as catalysts for introspection. And while my job is to kind of be the interpreter and relay what I hope to be valid information, it often sends a person on a path thereafter where they notice signs that they didn't notice before, or they feel a connection that maybe wasn't established, previously. And that can have a lifelong effect that goes long beyond the interaction with the medium.
There's a lot of powerful moments that have happened in Live from the Other Side. I'd say they're powerful from an audience's perspective. What have been some of those moments that were powerful to you giving that live reading, right? Because it's a different feeling. You're on a different end of everything.
Absolutely. The pressure's on with the live show. And part of why I wanted to share it was really that unedited, unfiltered aspect to not just demonstrate all the hits in the highlight reel, but to show the process and how I come to certain conclusions. In that process, I think my time with Billy Porter was really special in getting to connect with his family. What came through in that reading that really was eerie was a very specific song by a specific artist. And indeed, the person he brought had acknowledged that she was going to play this or was told to play this song, and she didn't, by the specific artist. So that moments like that are really uncanny because those are conversations people have had in their family. And I always find it interesting, like, we'll have like a song come through and then we'll have the exact artist who sang it, not a different version. And that's very strange in and of itself. So moments like that are just odd and reflect that if I can kind of connect to people's memories, then consciousness is clearly a lot more interconnected than we realize.
When you're getting ready for a session, obviously on the show, you are backstage, you come out and you kind of just do it, right? And it just like happens. It feels very like natural. But before you're rolling, how are you preparing yourself mentally and also emotionally? Because I feel like most of the time you're very strong in guiding someone through it, really kind of any sort of event. So how are you preparing yourself knowing that you may be engaging with powerful energies or very emotional connections for you or even for someone else?
Absolutely. I jokingly say beta blockers, they help, but truly, I mean, it is.
Propanolol.
Yes. The amalgamation of both stage fright and then also, wanting to do my best and do the best job possible. So when I, know that I have an event, particularly every Tuesday at 3 p.m., I really find that the day of, I kind of hermetically seal myself. I try to minimize any stimulus. I don't really listen to music. I try to not interact with people so that I can kind of tune into the more subtle aspects of what's going on internally. And every reading for me is a bit of a descent into a kind of inner underworld. I find that I get a lot more quiet. I get a lot more brooding and kind of moody. And I just find that I quite literally feel a descent. And then when I kind of am done with the reading, I quite literally feel myself kind of come back up and am more kind of connected with myself, my own thoughts and feelings. But that process is a lot like bungee jumping, where you hope that the rope works and pulls you back up, but you can never know for sure.
Do you feel like when you finish a session, you are able to kind of turn off the tap, if that makes sense? I mean, I'm getting vision of like Sookie Stackhouse, right? Who like can't turn it off ever sort of thing. Are you able to just disconnect and go about your day?
So there are certain processes that I do, like scribbling, that kind of help me turn on so that when I'm not scribbling, I can kind of reduce the impressions to the best of my ability. But there are always times where we have things pop in and it can be, frustrating and take a toll. But I do liken the impressions to kind of like currents. So, sometimes some people will come through like a white water rapid, right? It's just like a big flow of water. And then some people will come through like a drip faucet. And I have to kind of go with the strongest current as that's where the information leads. But when I'm done, regardless of who or what I've connected with, I generally feel an emptiness that is very full, as odd as that might sound. It feels kind of like a void that is full, which seems like a kind of
Interesting.
contradiction, but it's a very
Yeah.
good feeling and allows me to sustain for a few days until I then need to do another reading and kind of get the tension out rather.
This is kind of goes back to before you were you, but did you always feel like, did you always embrace it? Or was there a time when you're like, no, not doing it? Nope.
I think in many ways I really didn't have an option. I was having all these really strange active imagination moments where I would just sit in class and start seeing stuff about students and teachers. And I realized I couldn't hide that. I kind of had to come out of that closet to my dad. And ultimately, when he knew better, he did better. He embraced me after years of kind of trying to understand. And as he saw demonstrations of readings, he saw the effect and the power there. But my dad was a great testament in that you can love something without understanding it. And in my life, and I think a lot of LGBT people can relate to that sentiment that we don't have to be understood entirely, but love us for who we are. It's okay that we take up space.
Yeah. Are there times when, for example, when I lately, especially, um, I feel like I sleep very light and some things will just startle me awake. I may have to like leave a room. I just bought a house that's in the forest. So I'm kind of alone in like this
Oh yes,
murderous situation at the moment. But I'm actually, yeah, literally alone except for the bird.
yes,
Um and I felt like there has been like an increase in not being able to sleep at night or feeling like there's someone in the room. And a lot of times you just want to chalk that up to like it's caffeine. I think that's what everyone wants to do, right? Like, oh, I had too much coffee and now I'm having night terrors. But I often wonder, like, is there another way to look at that? I feel like I've had those since I was like 13. I've been like scared, you wake up abruptly and feel like someone's in the room. And it happens sometimes like every night. But I often do think like it's nothing, that's not real. It's just my imagination and too much caffeine. But
sure.
I do wonder, is there truth to it?
There,
That it could be something else?
I think to let you know. I mean, I think a big part of my process is in the realm of imagination. So I think that's one thing that I try to kind of tell people is that they think of if something's imaginary, it can't be real. But
Mhm.
I would argue some of the greatest inventions, the source of many epiphanies and realizations, come from a place of the imaginary. When we talk about hypnagogia, which is the state that you enter between wakefulness and sleep, that is an extremely valuable period of time where we often notice things that kind of go under the radar. Our subconscious kind of emerges into our conscious mind. And we can sometimes be inclined, I think, to connect to things that we wouldn't ordinarily feel or see. But if anything, I find that alone time often triggers intuitive moments. And I wonder if that's part of it. So many people very often are used to never really being alone for long periods. And then they find when they do, they start kind of feeling things and noticing things. And I kind of wonder if that's just part of like self awareness and being able to kind of connect on a more subtle level, much like I
Yeah.
do when I kind of hermetically seal myself before reading, right? You're kind of sealed in the forest. So
Yeah.
it's a similar process, I would imagine, or at least a similar setting.
Do you ever find that because obviously you connect with people and past loved ones, but have you ever had connections with a place, a location or something like that where you have felt something strong come through, even with no one maybe obvious on the other end that you are relaying something to, but a message coming through?
Absolutely. Yes. I've had several references in various different contexts, some in my own personal paranormal experiments and others for clients that were really interesting. I remember I had a client who was a supermodel who was looking for her father and she didn't know where he was. She had a couple ideas of who he could have been and some couple of areas where he might have been, but she basically saw me to try to get an answer to her ancestry. And I saw a very specific part of Europe. And, even within when we talk about Northeast, Southwest, was able to kind of identify which part of the country I felt. And she messaged me like long after and said that she had actually confirmed the identity of her dad. And it was indeed where I was drawn. And actually, the part of the country that I felt was where his family was from. So that's kind of an example where, like,
Yeah.
geography clearly kind of connected in some way. I've never been to that part of Europe, but I didn't need to.
This idea that death is not the end is really central to your work, obviously. Um, how do you feel like these ongoing connections with loved ones continue to shape the lives of those who were left behind, who are still here, right? Because there's this belief that it's done, that person passed away, and that's kind of it. But that's not necessarily what happens when they connect through you, especially. And also, how does that influence your own understanding of life after death?
I think in so many respects, I've been reminded of the importance of leaving a living legacy. That's a lot of L's. We like alliteration around here. But leaving a living legacy, I think that if anything, when I've had people come through, my belief is that when we transition, when we pass, we kind of evolve in our consciousness in the same way that a first grader is at a very different level mentally than perhaps an eighth grader. The idea is that if consciousness is eternal, if it lasts more than 78 years, then by nature, we make observations and grow and continue to learn in some way or another. And when people come in, they acknowledge seeing the ripple effect. Their life review seems to reflect this understanding that they were kind of like an individual in life. And when they pass, they become part of a vast ocean of consciousness and interconnected to one another in ways we don't often grasp when we're here. But it brings into the question of like micro, macro. We in many ways live life singularly. And I think when we transition, we get a much bigger picture perspective. And that has allowed me to try to see myself in other people. I try to meet people where they're at. I try to create space. And I also have learned to keep ego in check and to not come to predetermined judgments, because I've had a lot of people come through who I would have been inclined to kind of judge right off the bat. And then just like, when you talk to people, you learn that there's a lot of nuance to the human experience, and coming at it from a place of compassion is really the easiest way to do it.
Your understanding is so unique because you do have that connection. I think a lot of people seek information about what comes next from experts or people like you, or, books. I think of the book, I don't know if you're familiar with it, Many Lives, Many Masters. Okay, you are. And I actually really wanted to know your thoughts on that. My partner actually read it and loved it, and it gave him a lot of peace in the passing of his grandparents. So I was curious what your thoughts on it, and how do you feel about those concepts that it presents?
Reincarnation is a big subject that I get asked about as a medium, because the idea being that if people are coming through, well, then surely they must have not reincarnated. But I actually find that, if anything, this work has taught me that consciousness might be a lot more multifaceted than we realize. So while we can kind of recognize that if we are eternal, that there would be different chapters, different incarnations in this kind of eternal nature, that to me reflects a very valid point, regardless of people, whether or not they believe that we come back as a butterfly or as someone in a different country. Jury's still out. But I think by nature, if you believe in an eternal soul, there's going to be chapters to that soul's existence. And that would really be defined as reincarnation. So I certainly feel that, but equally find that I'm still able to kind of connect to people, even if aspects of them I feel have kind of continued on. So I think we are a lot more than what we realize, and it's very complicated.
Yeah, it does feel like even that concept of kind of coming back with the same souls and traveling through life again and again until you kind of get it right, and then not coming back, it still aligns with this idea of people coming from some sort of other side back to communicate with someone.
Absolutely. And to resolve. I think there's something to be said about tying up loose ends, and in some ways, perhaps our soul is trying to find its own closure.
Out of all of the messages that, and all of the readings that you've done, and I mean, we can talk about like this huge amount of time and a number of readings that you've done and connections that you've facilitated. When you look back at all of them, and it could even be recent, what do you feel was the most important message that you hope people take away from any of those readings, whether it's Life from the Other Side or before any of your other shows?
The fact that in reading Ricki Lake, that her family came through so strongly and was able to refer to something that they were doing at home, something that they were building for a very specific purpose, was a treehouse, is hilarious. And it was something that was shocking and probably not something they want to talk about on TV right away, but it came through. And as funny and lighthearted as that moment was, it substantiated to me, not only is clearly consciousness more connected as a result of me bringing up that very specific fact, but there's something about humor that is transcendent. And when they come through, don't seem to take things as seriously as we do. Why that is, who knows? But if anything, I think it's allowed me to see the value of spooky, uncanny, shocking moments, and then the funny counterpart. That's a little like, hunty.
Yeah.
It's funny. But the funny counterpart to a lot of the heavier things. And life truly is a balance between those two things. And they reflect that when they come through. It's not as heavy as people expect. It's actually sometimes hilarious.
I mean, I think people think of October as the time that things are heightened, or maybe midnight, or, the full moon or things like that. Do you find that things are heightened during those times? I apologize, she's dinging a bell, but heightened during those times, because you mentioned like on Tuesdays at 3, I've got to go do it. Well, there's, that's an average day for most people, and I'm sure do you find that there are times like October where things are elevated?
I find that for some reason around the holidays, information tends to come through a little bit more and in a different way. And it could just be the fact that people tend to congregate more, are a little bit more internal. In the winter, people tend to kind of obviously with less daylight, spend more time indoors, more self-reflection. We talk about kind of culturally and historically the connection between October 31st and November 1st as in many different cultures viewed as a very valuable time where seasons are dying, and we're preparing for rebirth and regrowth, and that's always been viewed as a valuable time for things to kind of come in. I don't notice it any more really than any of the other 364 days of the year. I tend to not work on Halloween. But if anything, I've kind of implemented that practice of what a lot of people embrace on November 1st, all 365 days a year.
Do you ever find that this happened today? And I'll just mention it. I had another junket this morning. I had interviews this morning with a cast of Goosebumps, and one of the people in the interview, one of the castmates, where I won't say who it is, but she mentioned that oddly, she was like, I have a ghost in my house and I really need to see a medium, which I thought, how crazy, because then I was talking to you today, right?
Yeah, funny.
And I actually mentioned it and she was like, that is so weird. And I was like, it is kind of weird that you just said that. And there was that moment for me today where it was like that thing that just like occurs and you're like, that is so strange.
Exactly. Those moments of meaningful coincidence, I think that they are understated and can give great value in life as far as helping us kind of step into moments of destiny and kind of realize our path.
I don't know if it's what the right word for it is, but there's this notion that queer people in general are more creative or more connected. Do you find that even LGBTQ people who experience that have a stronger connection to mediumship, I suppose? Is the right
I
word?
think a lot of LGBT people have embraced alternative spirituality because of the stigma and the difficulty of organized, traditional religion. And so, I think when we talk about like what informs psychic abilities, certainly self-awareness is a part of it. There's something to be said about the subconscious, the shadow, the inner child, all of that, I suspect, has some relation. And gay people have to face those subjects at an earlier age than sometimes others. And I suspect that might contribute. The government, which was interested in remote viewing between the 70s and the 90s publicly, actually looked for people who they felt could be good candidates for psychic abilities. And they found that those people generally were individuals who were bilingual, people who had a good grasp on both the sciences and art, and were able to kind of be tactile and also kind of imaginary and be able to kind of have both strengths. So there's something about being able to weigh both and that binary that I think makes people more psychic, and gay people might just sometimes fit that mold.
Yeah, I feel like you just brought up something that a lot of people don't know, and that it is that the government did a lot of studies and invested a lot of money in investigating not just remote viewing or those sorts of psychic abilities, but even telekinetic abilities and all sorts of things was actually funded by the government. So there is a lot of legitimacy to everything that people think of as like spiritual, right?
It can seem very woo, but there is a
Yeah.
long history and, of course, attempts to discredit remote viewing research. But I think the fact that it continued for about 30 years reflects that somewhere along the way there was something of value. And I've actually read the documents that were declassified, and very, very interesting meat and potatoes there. For those who are skeptical, it'd be really cool to explore those documents because it's the image replication aspect is fascinating.
It does. It feels like it was science, right? At that time, where now I feel like people think of it more as, like you said, it's kind of woo-woo,
Yeah,
is like the perception.
spiritualism, in its inception in like the 1850s, really was an attempt at trying to kind of quantify spirituality and to kind of try to provide evidence or tangible fact, to what originally was kind of more in the domain of religion. And so there's always been that kind of relationship between the objective and the subjective. And psychics have always kind of ridden that line. So while we come up with very specific, detailed, uncanny information, it's generally more qualitative than it is quantitative.
So you mentioned working, because for me, I don't know, it's hard to think of it as like, oh, this is the job, right? Like this is a job beyond like a skill and ability that you have. For people who watch your show or they follow you on social media or they're familiar with you, obviously getting a reading from you is going to be very challenging for the average person. What would your advice be to those people who maybe they do need to connect with a loved one who's gone? What would you tell them to do? Because I don't know. There's a hard part to be like, oh, just find a medium, you know?
Well, and the thing is I also don't encourage people to go run off and see mediums at the first, inkling of grief. I think it's important to, in some ways, come to terms with physical loss. I have grieved in my own life. I've lost people I've loved, and still cry over how much I miss them, despite, having this other faculty. But I would say when it comes to, people connecting with loved ones who've passed, there's great power in the idea of being the bridge, that if you can meet your loved one halfway, some amazing things can sometimes happen. And just showing a willingness to communicate can be really valuable. So if we think of, the language that they communicate with as meaningful coincidences, more in the realm of the subconscious, then we have to do certain things to allow for those things to come up. So like being aware of our dreams, being conscious of hypnagogia. A lot of people find value in meditation because it allows us to kind of get into these altered states of consciousness. Keeping a journal, writing to your loved one as if they're still, here, include them as if they're just in Europe and write to them and tell them about your day and how it went and invite them to experience these things with you. And you'd be surprised how when you do that, the universe does sometimes respond. And I think regardless of what people believe or don't believe, there's great value in taking your loved one with you. When you go on vacation, take them with you. When you walk on stage, when you're facing a big precipice in life where you're nervous, take them with you. Have them come with you, and you will find that you are supported not just as one, but by many. And that can empower a person far more than they realize.
I think that's great advice. I especially like that you kind of lead with, don't seek out a medium. Don't start there. Start with journaling.
I'm like, go see a therapist, go to a group, go to a circle, go read a book, do the introspection. But if you still feel, that there's a need, there's great value in that. But it's not my first plan of action.
Is there anything else with the rest of your season that you're excited about? I don't know how much you can mention. If there's anything exciting coming up.
It's a tricky show to promote because I never know who the celebrity guests are going to be, genuinely. So it's like, well, I have people I hope will show up, but we shall see. I think one of the aspects of the unpredictability is why people tune in. Anything can happen. It's completely raw and unfiltered. And you never know who's going to show up. You never know, going into it, what they're going to feel. In fact, that it's live, the pressure's on, and I have to navigate a lot of expectation. So in watching that, I hope people can get an appreciation for the process and understand that in the same ways that I get these little moments and create a space for those moments to come through, people can do the same in their own lives and in their own grief journey, even if it's to a lesser extent. So it can be valuable.
Thank you very much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate all of your time.
Absolutely. Thank you. You're a gem. I'm so thankful we got to connect today, and give your bird a hug for me.
I absolutely will. Thank you very, very much. If there's one thing we learned today from Tyler Henry, it's that life after death might not be the final chapter. It's a continuation of the love and connections we hold close. So, for those of you out there who've lost someone, whether it was recent or years ago, know that the bond you shared doesn't just vanish. Maybe you've been waiting for a sign, a message, or just some sense of closure. Tyler's work reminds us that those connections are still within reach and that healing is possible even after our loved ones have passed, whether it's through a medium like Tyler or simply staying open to the signs that surround you. That door to the other side might be closer than you think. And if today's conversation made you curious or gave you a little bit of hope, I really encourage you to check out Live from the Other Side, now streaming on Netflix. Tyler shares even more powerful stories of healing, connection, and those unexpected moments that can change everything. Thank you so much for joining me today. And remember, love and connection, they transcend time, space, and even death. So until next time, stay open, stay curious, and always know you're never truly alone. Pride is a production of Straw Hut Media. If you like the show, please leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Then, follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, the app formerly known as Twitter, and Snapchat @Pride, and tune in weekly for more episodes. Be sure to share this episode with your friends and subscribe for more stories from amazing queer people. If you'd like to connect with me, you can follow me everywhere @Levi Chambers. Pride is produced by me, Levi Chambers, Maggie Bowles, Ryan Tillotson, and Brandon Marlowe, and edited by Daniel Ferreira.